Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Next November, beyond the gates will be filled with many internal family wars. There will be happiness and arguments. First, let's find out about Naomi and Jacob's internal war. The three words "have a child" crept into Naomi and Jacob's lives like a small needle, but they were strong enough to tear apart the fragile silk of a marriage built on agreements, expectations, and fears. They had signed a contract as cold and tight as a commercial contract. Get married, stay together, no children. At that time, the two thought they had found the secret to balance. Naomi kept her physical freedom and her accelerating career trajectory. Jacob kept a sharp partner who could accompany her in the battles of family and business. But every confident formula crumbled before the uncertainties of biology and the arrogance of ambition. Naomi received a new job contract, glossy pages and terms that reeked of victory, including a neat but leaden line. No maternity for 18 months. Many would see it as a normal contract between a harsh organization and an individual eager to climb to the top. For Naomi, it was a conviction that her body was hers, her future hers to plan. Ironically, just this past week, that body had been sending vague signals of a possibility she hadn't considered. A missed period, fatigue, a brief bout of nausea in the elevator lobby, an averted glance in the bathroom mirror as a trembling hand rested on her stomach. From there, the arguments poured out like a pressure valve, initially hovering around innocuous questions about time, schedules, goals, then swelling into waves of attacks that touched the very roots of the fears they'd both kept under the carpet. Jacob spoke of lineage and heritage like an ancient family prayer. Naomi spoke of autonomy like an oath she couldn't break. They both tried to keep calm, but each sentence was under a shard of broken glass, and blood began to seep out before they knew it. Jacob never said it all, but in his heart he was born and grew up with an invisible legacy. The shadow of the ancestral portraits hanging along the hallway of the big house, the sparkling names in the family tree, the congratulations when a child was born and was already labeled as a future heir. He loved Naomi, acknowledged her ability and bravery, but in his head he kept repeating a difficult problem. If he didn't have a child, where would that legacy go? And who would he look at when his hair fell out in front of the mirror to believe that he hadn't betrayed a chain of expectations that had lasted for generations? He didn't realize that it was this problem that had made him start to slide into arbitrary speculations, and then one afternoon, when he accidentally came across on Naomi's desk a document with the seal of a famous law firm, a brief note about separate property in case of separation, he felt like a broken string of trust. In an instant, Jacob was no longer the calm man sitting in the conference room negotiating, nor the husband who listened and was patient. He was a child left in the dark hallway of the ancestral home, realizing that the party in the living room was not for him, realizing that his shadow was not noticed by many people. He rummaged through the excuses he had memorized. Maybe Naomi was just being cautious. Maybe it was mandatory advice that came with the new contract. Maybe the lawyer had exaggerated the risks, but all the maybes were cut short when he saw Naomi scrawled on the edge of the paper, "To keep me intact in any compromise." He was disappointed, of course, but what rose most strongly was a silent anger. The anger of a man who thought he had put his whole heart into a common frame of reference, now discovering that his companion had long ago installed his own escape route. The story branched out like cracks spreading from the center of a strong impact. In one corner, Naomi stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, looking at the straight lines of her new suit and wondering if it was her perfectionism that had pushed her to the brink of being unattached. She remembered the contract negotiations where the 18-month maternity leave clause was pushed as a mandatory milestone in exchange for project budgets, hiring rights, the right to have the last word in the meeting room. She had talked about the risks of women in a work environment designed by people who had never had to sit around counting their periods, never felt the occupation of a living being inside them. She won, they signed, the newspapers praised her toughness, and she breathed a sigh of relief knowing that for at least the next 18 months, her body would not be looked at with a calculating eye. Then a few tiny symptoms like stray ants crawled back up all the solid theories. turning the bathroom into a place where she sat with her knees bent for hours, going to the pharmacy like a thief stealing her own heart, and turning the notes on her phone into a strange list. Blood test, ultrasound, consulting a lawyer, rereading the prenup, preparing an email to HR in case of the worst. She didn't hate children. She was just afraid she would dissolve into the role of a walking cradle, waking up one sunny afternoon without recognizing the voice in her head that on the other side. Jacob sat in the posh bar on the ground floor of a hotel where he often met with business partners. The yellow light hiding the dark circles under his eyes and the smell of clove wine hiding his restlessness. The woman sitting next to the table was a colleague from a media consulting firm, with a suave demeanor and the right amount of smile, who had texted him polite compliments after presentations a few times. Now those polite messages suddenly became a buoy for a man who was floundering. He talked ramblingly about balancing family and career, about the expectations of lineage, about the decisions men thought they controlled but were actually controlled by family stories. She listened as all media professionals are trained to listen, placing 2 more glasses on the table, leaning close enough so that the scent of her perfume drifted into his half of the room. With just a decision as small as half a breath, things could have gone down a different path, a path filled with darkness and stains that were difficult to wash away. But had he gone too far that night, or had things just stopped at the edge, leaving behind a faint lipstick stain on his sleeve and a drink bill he didn't remember paying? Was he pushing his already fragile marriage to the brink of destruction just to punish the woman he loved with a lawyer's note he'd never had the courage to ask for? In their apartment, the pre-printed separation agreement that Naomi kept in a drawer locked with her own birth number suddenly felt like a heavy object. She didn't want to sign it, but the fact that it existed, prepared, neatly bound like a backup plan, was a terrifying form of power. The power of choice. One night, Naomi turned on the desk lamp, flipped through the pages, stopped at the classification of assets, the definition of severe emotional distress, the provisions of trial separation and media silence, and asked herself what many would call a cruel question. Was she in love with her husband or with the idea of a marriage that allowed her to be herself? And if the answer leaned toward the idea, was she okay with turning her private life into a case study in risk management? As her finger touched the signature box, she imagined another name underneath, the name of a child who might not yet exist but who had changed the structure of her thoughts, and wondered, if she had a child, who would she become? The days that followed were a series of public and behind-the-scenes events. On the surface, Naomi and Jacob still appeared together at a charity event of the family foundation, exchanging smiles for photos, reading carefully prepared thank yous, hiding the smell of clinic disinfectant still on Naomi's sleeves and the smell of alcohol still on Jacob's shirt collar. Underneath, rumors crept in about the no maternity clause in Naomi's contract, along with whispers about her consulting a lawyer, all creating a picture of both admiration and criticism. As always when the public faced a woman who demanded a clear division of what she gave and what she kept, Naomi read those harsh comments, sighed, but what worried her more was not the public but Jacob's silence. He did not question, did not accuse, nor did he seek an opportunity to talk. The silence had replaced anger, and it was it, not the harsh words, that made the shared apartment as cold as an after-hours laboratory. She made an appointment with the doctor for Monday morning. The blood test results were inconclusive, the ultrasounds were inconclusive, everything was in a gray area. The doctor spoke briefly about stress, about transient disturbances, about the possibility of a very early pregnancy if there was one. Naomi left the clinic with an unopened envelope, as if delaying opening it was her way of maintaining control for a few more hours. On the way home, she stopped by the coffee shop where she had sat with Jacob on their first date, writing on napkins the vague terms of a childless marriage. Back then, they had both laughed as if they had invented a new definition of happiness. Now, she looked at the couples around her, heard a child at the next table drop a spoon, the sound hitting her nerves, and wondered, is a childless family still a family in the way people preach it? Or has that definition never been fixed, only reproclaimed by louder voices with the power to define it? The idea of freezing her eggs suddenly occurred to her. a middle ground that would both open the door to the future and maintain the 18-month mark she had signed up for. But was it a solution or a way to postpone the fear? And would Jacob read it as a concession or another way to postpone the three-word battle of having a baby? Jacob was busy, too. He went through his assets, looked at his trust structure, spoke to his financial advisor in a cold, spreadsheet-like tone. If no one mentioned the child, he would mention the legacy. If no one mentioned the trust, he would rewrite it into a clause. He didn't realize that the act of rewriting mirrored Naomi's "keep me whole" in a bitter way. They were both building walls of paper, while what remained between them, a look hiding a tear, one hand still searching for the other in the night, was slowly eroding. Then an email landed in his inbox. An invitation to a project launch with a packed guest list, including the woman from the bar. He hesitated to delete or keep, hesitated to go or stay, hesitated between proving to himself that he didn't need Naomi and facing the fact that everything he was doing now was just a chain reaction of pride. The next evening, a small accident occurred. A delivery man mistakenly placed an envelope in Naomi's hand when calling Jacob's name. There was nothing sinister inside, just a promotional handkerchief embroidered with the brand's name and a pre-printed card signed, "See you soon." But in a marriage already riddled with suspicion, that handkerchief was enough to awaken all the worst scenarios the human imagination could conjure. Naomi stood at the kitchen table, picked up the handkerchief and set it down, as if it weighed the weight of a confession. She didn't scold or question Jacob. She just added another sheet of paper to the divorce file, this time a note of her own. All signs are neutral until you give them meaning. But was she neutral enough when her heart beat faster than usual every time she thought of the bar, the yellow lights, and a faint lipstick smear whose memory she wasn't sure had fabricated? The questions are overwhelming. If the envelope test is positive, what will Naomi do about the no maternity clause? Will she fight to rewrite the clause, escalating a legal media battle, turning her personal story into a milestone of autonomy and labor? Even if the price is a bruised career and a marriage stretched to the breaking point? If the test is negative, will they breathe a sigh of relief as if they had just avoided an accident? Or will they feel disappointed because they realize that between them, the need to protect themselves has overwhelmed the need to hug each other? How will Jacob, if he knows about the envelope and the clinic, react? Will he kneel down and apologize for his speculations and stumbles at the bar, admitting that he let his family and past control him? Or will he build another layer of clauses so that he will never have to admit weakness? Will they dare to go to a marriage counselor to turn the maybes into a plan? Or will they still choose the path of silence until the end? The storm in the family did not stop at the two of them. Outside, relatives, partners, employees, friends, all felt the change in the atmosphere. A smart assistant started to divide Naomi and Jacob's schedules to avoid overlapping. A relative sent a photo of the children at a weekend party as a gentle reminder. An article noting women who do not give birth can still make a big career was tagged by someone Naomi, while another article about the mission of continuing the family line was forwarded to Jacob. Private lives were exposed piece by piece under the public spotlight that they could not turn off. And in the center, there was a sealed envelope, an unsigned separation contract, a seemingly innocuous handkerchief, and 3 short words enough to change the direction of a family. Have a child as the night approached dawn. Naomi sat in the kitchen, opened the envelope. She read it, remained silent for a long time, then folded it and placed it next to the separation contract. No one knew what she had read, except that her eyes shone with a strange determination, both soft and hard. She poured a glass of water, stood up, went to her office, turned on her computer, and drafted a new document. A proposal to the company for a pilot program for female managers returning from childbirth, for flexible working hours, for project compensation and position protection, for how the company could turn a prohibition into a framework of support. She didn't know whether she was pregnant or not, which would be the answer to the medical data, but she knew that if a child came along someday, it would grow up in a world in which its mother had helped push down a barrier. And if the child didn't, then someone else would benefit from that framework. She saved the draft, sat up straight, and let the questions of doubt fall to the floor like dust. Jacob returned one slow morning, standing in the doorway of his office, watching Naomi hunched over her monitor. He wanted to say a million things, from apologies to confessions that men rarely have the vocabulary to pronounce. But he held his tongue not out of pride, but because he realized for the first time in months that he was seeing something he had never seen before. Not a man bent on keeping himself at all costs, but someone who was opening a path for them by rewriting the rules of the game. He took a step back, sat down in the chair opposite, and put his car keys on the table, like a weapon before entering into a negotiation. In his mind, the paper bunkers he had built were becoming suffocating. Would he have the courage to rewrite his own rules of the game, admitting that legacy was not just measured by the length of a name but also by how we treat the people we love when the toughest questions come knocking? Outside, the sun was high, pouring light through the blinds, drawing two shadows on the wall of the apartment. Imperfect, not fixed, but still there. The future was a matrix of possibilities. The envelope could contain any answer. The separation agreement could be signed or torn. The handkerchief could remain a meaningless piece of evidence. And the three words "have children" could one day be spoken not as a sentence or a key to salvation, but as a choice understood and borne by both. But before they could go anywhere, they had to answer the seemingly simplest question that had long eluded them. Did they still want to be on the same side of the table, or had each quietly moved their chairs to opposite ends? And if they still wanted to sit next to each other, what would they leave behind so that the chair next to them would no longer be just a formality? The three-word battle of having children may not be over yet, but the moment the two put pen to paper to write new things, their family history took a turn, not in terms of the answer, but in how they decided to ask the question.